Sohan, people are worried about us.
Yeah, I know, and I'm so sorry. I guess our last episode was a bit full of doom and gloom for everyone.
Yeah, I had a friend hit us up saying that he wanted to start drinking at 9 o'clock in the morning after he had listened to the episode.
And that's pretty much the reaction we're looking for. Before we get into today's episode, we do want to say a lot of this was shaped, and we talked a lot about our last episode, which covered the results of the Ohio primary on the Democratic side. And as you can tell, it wasn't the happiest episode, but we do recommend that you take a listen to that first before jumping into this one.
Because in this episode, we're talking to David Pepper, who is the head of the Ohio Democratic Party, and he is going to try to talk us off the ledge of all of our doom and gloom from the numbers from the primary that happened the other week.
And just to note, we had a bit of an audio difficulty here. So his voice is going to sound a little bit different at the beginning than it does for the majority portion at the end. But we promise you, it's the same guy.
Today on the show, we have David Pepper, who is the Ohio chairman for the Democratic Party. David, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to be with you guys. Thanks for what you're doing, too. I know you've been plugging away and getting a lot of attention to issues and candidates.
Thanks. You just recently listened to our last episode where we were the Debbie Downers about the Ohio Democratic primary, and you believe that we interpreted these numbers wrong. Tell us a little bit about that.
I think you let the Republicans spin you into depression. So the Republicans had a terrible primary. We they went through months of attacks. They endorsed DeWine, and Mary Taylor did what she did. We didn't endorse as a party. We actually saw a lot of debates and forums. And so the Republicans were basically stuck after that primary trying to convince anyone that something good happened. And so they tried to turn these turnout numbers into some kind of narrative. But even national journalists like the Washington Post within a day basically described what they were saying as myths. So I was really glad to get on the show and talk through that. So let me just go through a couple pieces and interrupt me if I'm going on for too long.
All right.
So typically for the last more than a decade, but going back years, the Republican electorate is more sort of disciplined about showing up in primaries than Democrats. And so the truth is that the last week's numbers represented the smallest margin where they had more than we did. So the number, if you look at it as a percentage, the margin of their leading us was and it was about the same as 2010, the margin of difference. It was a little narrower in 10. But here's the bigger difference that I want to make sure your listeners heard. The Republican Party endorsed Mike DeWine, Jim Renacci, and their whole ticket. And they were hustling as hard as they could to get the vote out because they were worried about Mike DeWine and Renacci winning. So the last month of the primary, their entire infrastructure, if you look closely, was dedicated to touching base with Republican voters to make sure they showed up and voted for Mike DeWine. We were neutral in our primary. We literally couldn't do anything if we had one side would have thought, oh, this is going to favor Cordray or Schiavone or Kucinich. So we didn't do anything with our field program that we were building rapidly to actually promote turnout. That wasn't really our role. Individual candidates like Cordray and Kucinich did, but as you know, they only started their campaigns in January. I can tell you, they didn't have big voter turnout efforts. They didn't have a field team set up in just a couple months. So you have one party with the entire infrastructure of the Republican Party going to bat for their endorsed slate, the other party not doing anything. And even with that, the margin of the turnout was 55-45. And by one other way to look at it, there was a big Republican turnout in 2016. And you guys were talking about Republican energy on your podcast. The drop in the turnout from the Republican side was much bigger between 16 and 18 than our drop. They fell a lot further. Or to put it slightly differently, in 14, because we didn't have neither one of us had a contested primary in 14, their increase in their primary turnout versus 14 was lower than ours from 14. And one other thing I'd say is they had, as you guys said on your podcast, they had multiple candidates on television. They had Renacci on television in a contested Senate race. We obviously had Sherrod not contested. So they also spent millions more. So when you add all that up, it actually, it's not the doom and gloom. By the way, one other point I'd say is it's hard to project how primary turnout impacts the general. In 2012, Republicans way overvoted Democrats in the primary, and obviously went on to win. But to the extent we're reading primary, the turnout differentials in any way, the truth is, in a year where we weren't doing much because we couldn't, because we were neutral, and the Republicans were doing everything, it actually greatly narrowed from 16. And I think this is going to build into the 18 problem for Republicans. I actually think, given that they literally did everything they could to help DeWine, the fact that their turnout fell so dramatically from their 16 turnout and it was not much higher than their 14 turnout where they didn't have a primary, I think they're the ones with the energy problem. We obviously have to work our tails off to get our vote out. We're going to. We need to be on message, as you guys talked about. But I think the Republicans are actually, when you look closely, because Mike DeWine is not an exciting candidate for them. They have no diversity on their ticket. Almost everyone running is a gerrymandered congressman running for re-election. I think they're going to actually struggle, and I think some of what that result shows is that they didn't have a very energetic primary after investing all those resources.
I think you're absolutely right in that, and they've spent way more money than they planned to, at least in the governorship campaign. So one of the numbers that are standing out to me is 2010 versus 2018. In 2010, 80,000 more Democrats voted in the Ohio primary than the 2018. And that's supposedly the year that Democrats stayed home and that Obama lost his majority in Congress. Why is this difference so big?
I mean, I would say that, and I ran in 2010. I mean, 2010, you had literally governor and others, all were Democrats. And the party was all in to obviously support them all year long. And as I said, this last week, the party, because we were neutral, wasn't pushing, and we couldn't have pushed. So I honestly think that it's a little bit apples to orange. But even in that year, if you look closely, the margin of difference by percentage was the Republicans also had about 70,000 more people vote that year. And so that was a 54 to 46% difference. And this last week was 54.5 to 46.5 or something like that. So even that year, which was a unique year because we had Strickland all the way on down, and the party going to bat for them is different from the one we did this year. But even then, the margin is about the same. And by the way, that was a very close year. I mean, Richard Cordray lost that year to Mike DeWine by half a point. So that was sort of in a statewide election. That's been the high watermark since ever since. So like I said earlier, I would say that a lot of these are apples to oranges, but the truth is we saw the lowest margin of advantage for Republicans over Democrats by percentage last week than we've seen in years. And that was with a fully engaged Republican Party and a Democratic Party that basically wasn't pushing turnout because we couldn't.
David, what really gets me, and we talk about these things like we live in a normal world where I totally get that comparing years and different years. Sometimes it's cherry picking, sometimes it doesn't make sense, and that does sound like data in a normal world where we try to look for trends and things. We live in a world where Donald Trump's president, right? I mean, this is not like it. Just what gets me is that even with these trends where it might look a bit better, like how do we live in this world and we're still talking about a Republican edge that we are narrowing, but we can't actually get to? Shouldn't we be seeing some type of energy that's just you can sense it and feel it and see it in the numbers? Because we don't see it in the numbers. I feel like that we should.
I honestly I keep saying it, like I think you guys are fixated. I would say it in the numbers that we saw issue one pass thanks to thousands of Democratic activists getting hundreds of thousands of signatures on a fully volunteer effort. In the primary that we just had, we had a Senate candidate with no primary. We had a governor's race where only one of the candidates even had television ads versus the other side where they were going back and forth for months spending millions. And in Ohio, the reality is if you're not running television ads in Ohio, you're really not. Most people don't, and you guys said this in your last podcast, most people don't even know you're there. So it just, it was not a fully engaged primary. And as I said, the party, which is the primary get out the vote mechanism in any year, wasn't getting out the vote because we were neutral. So I mean, I wouldn't let these primary numbers. Again, we had a higher turnout than we did in 14, than we did in 12, slightly less than 10, and percentage-wise, the best we've seen. And I think I said in the prior comment, our drop versus 16 was actually a good deal less than the Republican drop. They seem to want, even with all their hard work, I think they are the ones that are probably struggling more with energy going into the fall. And as I said before, we've got a candidate in every district. They don't have that. Our candidates reflect the diversity of our state. Theirs are basically all white men. The top of their ticket is a guy who's basically been on the ballot for 45 years and is not an exciting person. I think in the end, we will be the ones with far more energy, and then obviously we'll also, in the fall, unlike the primary, be able to utilize our entire sort of 88 county get out the vote infrastructure to make sure we're pushing that turnout.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked to a lot of those candidates out there in so many of those districts where Democrats haven't run, and it's really impressive. And there are some great ones out there. You mentioned the governor's race, and I just wanted to talk about that a little bit because, that was one of the ones that got national attention, and it was supposed to be indicative of a potential split in the Democratic Party that didn't really materialize, as we saw. How do you feel about the Ohio Dems? Do you feel like they're unified? Do you feel like there's a divide there?
Yeah, one of the things I'm most proud of, and this I mentioned before, we did not endorse, and there's been a lot of sort of angst about what role the parties played in primaries. And I think the Republican Party made a major mistake by trying to anoint Mike DeWine. I think their primary got especially nasty when they did that. And our attitude was, let the best candidate win. We know Schiavone and I know Schiavone and Cordray really well. I don't know Kucinich as well, but Cleveland obviously knows him, and a lot of progressives have liked him. And our attitude was let the voters figure it out, and they did that. And what I like about that is you're still getting back and forth in the Republican side because of their endorsements. You already saw Schiavone the other day. I think just today, maybe it was yesterday, endorse Cordray. Kucinich I thought was very graceful on election night. So I think the fact that we played it straight, didn't endorse, and had debates all over the state made it, not rancorous, but actually generally a positive campaign. No one was going negative on television against anybody else, and I think it makes our ability to unite far, far better than theirs. So I feel good about where we are, and as you just said, and I tried to say this to the national media. The national media is quick to try and make it into sort of a replay of Bernie, Hillary, and I don't think any of our candidates fit into those boxes. And as you said, I think the results showed that. Each of our candidates is sort of nuanced. They have different views on things, and they don't really fit into any obvious boxes. And then obviously, to his credit, Richard Cordray clearly, ran away with it in the end, and I also think that makes unifying a lot easier.
Keep talking us back from this ledge, all right?
I will. I'll come on every week to do that.
The next point we brought up that we were scared about is the fundraising. The Republicans outraised the Democrats in this excitement year by over $4 million. I mean, how important is the money? Do you think that Democrats could go on without beating the Republicans in fundraising?
I don't know what that's coming from. I mean, Mike DeWine basically. So first of all, let me just say, Columbus Republicans, and we're seeing it with the Speaker resigning, we're seeing it with the ECOT, they raise their money through corruption. They raise it generally through pay-to-play, and they'll have advantages there because they'll have places like ECOT and payday lenders giving them money to do their bidding. So there is an obvious advantage they have because, A, that's how they fundraise, and B, they're incumbents. But so we haven't talked about it yet. We have an amazing set of candidates across the state. Steve Dettelbach, running against Dave Yost. We've got Kathleen Clyde. We've got great congressional candidates. We've got Zach Space. We've got Rob Richardson. Our down-ticket candidates, even though Republicans have every advantage, the last two filing periods have outraised their opponents, in some cases by a ton. Rich Cordray, since he entered the race, outraised Mike DeWine. Now, Mike DeWine has a lot of money because he's been doing pay-to-play for 4 years, and he had a $10 million war chest. He blew through most of that money in this primary. So I don't, they'll have more money than we do. They have certain advantages. We need to have enough to get our message out. But actually, so far, if you look since the fall, the last two reporting periods, every one of our statewide candidates, not the governor but the others, has outraised their opponent. In some cases, Rob Richardson's a great leader from Cincinnati. He's outraised his opponent like 3-1 or something like that, and he's a first-time candidate. So we will have the resources we need to win. Mike DeWine will continue to shake down like vendors to the AG's office, and that's where a lot of his money comes from. But I wouldn't help our candidates. I hope people who are on here who care about our candidates will help them. But I'm pretty confident that we will have candidates who are fully funded and able to run the races they need to run.
David, can I tell you another thing I'm depressed about?
Yeah.
I feel like it's a therapy session, but
No, I'm glad to address this, but go ahead.
We talk a lot about the party's messaging, and I agree with you for the most part. I mean, I think like the Dems have great candidates out there and are doing a good job. And this is what kind of gets me, is because when we talk to these candidates, we know how good they are. It's my worry is that voters don't see that, and voters are not going to, that there's a problem on that end, if you get what I'm saying, that there's something within the population that just fancies Republican ideas more than Democratic ideas for some reason. And even if the message is perfect, you're just never going to convince. And that's what gets me, really. Because
let me say two things. One, the message has not been perfect in the past, and that's a problem. And you guys are right. And if we're not smart, and I think our candidates are, if we spend every day spinning out of control about Russia and Mueller and you name it, and whatever chaos in D.C. and Democrats, like all Americans, are watching that stuff. That's how we lose. That's how we get baited into debating stuff that people don't care about. And this year, our candidates, more than we did in 16, and I know you've talked to some of them, but from top to bottom, have to be focused on the kind of issues that voters really care about. The voters that are sort of up for grabs. And those issues are things like health care. It's things like this for-profit charter school scandal called ECOT and public education, which has really suffered in the last 7 years under this Columbus regime. And I think being focused on those messages, and also, really highlighting how corrupt Columbus has become, the need to clean it up so we can get back to doing the people's work. And I think it needs to be simple, straightforward, and in all 88 counties. Because you're right, if we get off message, and I'll be honest, the default for the last several decades in Ohio is, we're comfortable, as you're sort of saying, they've been comfortable with the Republicans running the state. I mean, that's clear. And we have to make a strong case that they're running the state terribly, and frankly, they're running it so corruptly they need to get fired. That case was made in 2006, and I think we can. The facts are there to make that case now, but it's going to take focus, discipline, not getting caught up in all the Trump stuff, because people know where they are on Trump. If they're upset about him, they're going to show up. But a lot of other voters who aren't that political, they can't figure out which side's right. It feels like noise, and I think the way to break through with them is to say, kind of like Connor Lamb did in Pennsylvania, I'm here to fight for your health care. I'm here to fight for better schools, and not get caught up by the chaos in Washington. And I think you guys mentioned it. We have candidates like Ken Harbaugh. That's exactly how they're talking. They're not getting sort of sidetracked by the chaos. They're focusing on these real issues. And we have candidates all over the state doing exactly that. And in the end, it will be on them to do what you're talking about.
So when
I'm confident that we'll be able to see that happen.
So when you say real issues, are you talking about keeping it more locally focused than talking about the big national issues?
Absolutely. I mean, to the extent that those national issues are coming to play, like attacks on health care, I think you talk about health care. But you talk about how health care is hurting Ohio. And to the extent you have candidates like Mike DeWine taking the bait to try and act like Trump and saying he's going to get rid of Medicaid expansion, absolutely talk about that nonstop, and talk about the damage that would do, and talk about, if you're Richard Cordray, how you want to improve access and deal with affordability and not cut 700,000 people off their health care. So, but even if it's a national issue, I would make it about Ohio. And that then boils down to individual candidates for Congress. They should be talking about health care in their districts. When Steve Shabbat in Cincinnati, or Bob Gibbs, or other folks, Brad Wenstrup, when they voted for these bills to tank health care, they were throwing tens of thousands of people in their districts under the bus. So if you look at the successful candidates, they've stuck to these sort of kitchen table issues. They've stayed out. They haven't been baited into the national crazy debates that come out of the White House every day, and they'll bring it back to health care of the families in their district. And in Ohio, because of this ECOT stuff, education and public schools in their district, money wasted because of that. And about also for 7 years, and you guys know this state house has taken money from schools and local communities and taken it from those areas, brought it to the state, given it out as tax cuts. So every single state house candidate in Ohio can talk about reinvesting in local communities and ending this trickle-down economics that isn't working. But yeah, I think you break it all back, you make it fit your district, and again, that's what the less insidery voters, that's what they want to hear about. People's heads are spinning by the craziness in Washington, and I think if a candidate gets caught up only on that, I think then what you're sort of worried about will happen. If we have discipline in our message and we're the ones focused on those issues, I think our candidates can win. By the way, not just where they should win, but even places where people don't expect it to happen.
And I think, and I want to end here on a very positive note, because I do think we have some outstanding candidates. And one of the things that really stands out to me is the amount of women that have been nominated for Congress for Democrats. I mean, that really is awesome. And I really hope that it's going to bring out new voters. Do you see that now? Do you see the positive energy still coming out?
Yeah, and I wanted to correct the record from your last podcast. Someone said that we had only endorsed men going into that. That wasn't true. We basically stayed out of contested primaries, but one of the people that we endorsed was Betsy Rader. We stayed out of the other ones. Ken Harbaugh had sort of a phony candidate against him that looked like kind of a shell candidate by Republicans, so we endorsed him. But we endorsed Betsy Rader, so we didn't endorse men. But yeah, I think this will be the year of the woman. And by the way, it's not just Congress, and it's great that we have 10 out of 16 women running for Congress. That's the first time ever, I believe. We have 42 of our 99 state house candidates are women, and 9 of our 17 Senate candidates are women. Many of these women are running in the exact suburbs where women are the big swing voters of this state. So I think as we saw last week, women voters are voting for women. There were a bunch of primaries in the state last week between men and women. We basically, for the most part, almost entirely stayed out of them because we tried to maintain a neutral approach. Women won 90% of those primaries, and that's why there are 10 running for Congress. I think it's clear that women, given all that's happening with Trump and the Me Too movement, they are looking to find women candidates. And not only is it great that we have them at every level, but Republicans don't at all. They have one of their 16 congressional candidates is a woman. Only one of their 7 statewide candidates, a Supreme Court candidate, is a woman. 3 of our 7 are. So this goes back to the energy I talked about. When women show up, if they're a swing voter, if they were a Romney voter, and they're now showing up saying, I want to elect women this year, which they are saying, they're going to have all around the state almost none to vote for on the Republican side. But when they show up and look at the Democratic candidates, they'll see a lieutenant governor who's an incredible woman, been a leader for a long time. They'll see a Supreme Court candidate. They'll see Kathleen Clyde. In 10 of 16 congressional districts, they'll see women. And almost half the time, they'll see a woman running for the State House. I think it's one of the enormous advantages we have is that our ticket reflects our state in just about every way. And their ticket is a bunch of older white guys who, frankly, have been around a long time. In many cases, are only there because of gerrymandering. And there's not a lot to be excited about, especially if you're a swing voter, a woman in a suburb who's questioning your party because of the treatment of women by Trump on down. So, yeah, I think it's a huge factor going into this November. We're very excited about our ticket for that reason.
Yeah, I loved all those stats. I mean, that's incredible. And one of the other ones, and I don't actually know the stats on this, but I am 100% certain of it, that there are so many new people who are running on the Democratic side, and you're absolutely right that a lot of the Republicans who are running are people who've been there for decades.
We've got people who joined Indivisible who are now running. Shauna Roberts is this great candidate in the 6th district. That's where she came from. We've got people who joined progressive movements with incredible backgrounds. I was in Massillon, Ohio the other day. A woman running, her name Lauren Friedman, who was basically an activist with a lot of the marches last year. I asked her, hey, Lauren, what did you do before the social service work you do now and before you got involved in the progressive movement? She was like, oh, I was in Navy intelligence. This is a woman who served in Baghdad and Afghanistan and Guantanamo Bay after going to the Naval Academy. She's running for the state senate. I mean, so it's not just that we have any old candidates running. We have really interesting, compelling people. As you said in your prior show, a whole lot of veterans. It's a really incredible group. And if these were anywhere close to even districts and not gerrymandered, we would be winning all over the state. But even with the bad gerrymandering, I think the quality of our candidates is such that we're going to be winning in places where no one expects it.
I really hope so. And I think the one message we can all agree on is just, don't get complacent. There's no time to get complacent.
By the way, and that's the one thing I do agree with that. I don't look at the turnout numbers from last week and say, hey, blue wave or disaster. The message is we have to, between now and November, create a blue wave. It starts with great candidates, and it starts with talking to every voter we can. And now that the primary is over and we're not neutral anymore, we can get to work doing that. So I don't disagree with, we should all be, going to this eyes wide open. It is hard to win Ohio as Democrats, but we have every opportunity to do it, and it's going to take, knocking on every door, making every phone call, and getting, the best turnout we've seen in years to make it happen. And the good thing, we have the great candidates to do it. We have energized activists. Now we just got to go get it done.
Yeah, I'll agree 100%. Sir, thank you so much for coming on the show. We appreciate you of talking us off that ledge and giving us a little therapy lesson.
But I'm happy to help.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Good talking to you. Thanks for what you're doing.
So I want to talk really quickly about that "don't get complacent" line, because I was thinking it the whole time I was before I asked it. There's a great video game out there, and I know one of the listeners of the pod knows it well because I played it with them a lot a few years ago. And it's called Football Manager, and you manage a professional football soccer team, and you're the coach, right? The manager, and one of your jobs is to give team talks, and especially at halftime, one of the big team talks you can give is "don't get complacent." And some players react well, some players don't. But it's always when, everyone's.
Were we the players that didn't react well with that last episode we did?
Yeah, well, a little bit, yeah. Maybe, you're talking about us?
Yeah. I mean, we were complaining in the last episode, right? So
we were, but I also think our message was, don't get I think it's an important message, just because it almost feels like we're at that halftime, right? I mean, it's a bit over a year since Trump was inaugurated. We're, a few months out from the midterm election. We just had the primary. And I think it's fair to, I still think, and I think David Pepper would agree with us, that the numbers aren't fantastic, right? There is some concern to be had that the Republicans have gained such a strong foothold in Ohio that it's just impossible for them to let go. And I think the message to Dems is, don't get complacent. We're almost at the halftime mark here. We may think that we're up because we're seeing some great energy out there, but still, I mean, if we're in a lead at all, it's a very, very slim lead, and it could be easily lost.
Yes, 100% agree with you. Before we go into that a little bit more, I want to point out another error I've made since David Pepper called me out on one. I got to call myself out on one. When we were talking numbers of money raised, I was talking congressional candidates, and he was talking about statewide candidates. So our numbers were a little off, and we were a little confusing there. But I want to point that out. That was my bad there. But back to what you were saying. Yes, 100%. There are some great signs coming out of this. The fact that we have candidates running for basically every office, from the state house to the congressional districts to the governor's race, we have competitions everywhere. I mean, that's outstanding. And these are new, energetic people that are running. And if we didn't learn anything from the last election, it's that voters are sick and tired of the same old, same old.
Yeah, I mean, a Democrat running in every district. That's incredible. Like, what a line. And I don't think we hear it enough. And I guess another point about messaging that I think David hit on as well, and that it could be better. It's still there in a lot of individual candidates. But again, there has to be that cohesion to drive voter turnout across the state, right? I mean, people still feel that connection to a party. Certainly the Republicans do. And the Democrats need to build that as well.
All right. I'm off the ledge. Still being a bit of a realist here. I'm not convinced 100% the blue wave will happen. Right? Even on Blue Wave Pod, I still think there's a lot to be done, but I'm not giving up.
No, I mean, we need to keep talking about the issues that are important. We need to keep talking to the people out there who are working to make, a better country, a better state, a better county, a better city. And there are a lot of great people working hard out there, so we should work just as hard.
So thank you to David Pepper again for coming on the show. You can find all of our episodes online at bluewavepod.com, or you can listen to us on iTunes or Google Play or all of your favorite podcast apps.